There are none that are known. And so we'll move to the Chief Executive and Group Chief Financial Officers updates. Mr. Stevick and Mr. Gudstill and Mr. Blick, who is online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And good morning, councillors. Could I first of all start on behalf of the staff of the Auckland Council Group with an acknowledgement of the many Aucklanders who have been impacted by the floods of the 27th of January and the cyclone Gabriel. The impact has obviously been devastating for many, and our thoughts are with them, and our continued efforts will be applied in support of the many Aucklanders who have been impacted. In my update this morning, there will be an understandable focus on where our effort and attention has been over the last month. Obviously, I'll spend some time talking about the work that we've done in support of responding to the impact of the flood and the cyclone. But first of all, I want to cover our response to the government reform agenda, or our position on the government reform agenda, in three parts. Firstly, the water reform agenda. By way of update, the Water Services Entities Act 2022 was passed in December and set up the 4 entities across New Zealand, and then in December the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee called for submissions on the Water Services Legislation Bill and the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill. Auckland Council has an extension to provide our submissions to that committee by the 24th of February. The draft submission is on today's governing body agenda. We continue to respond to requests for information from DIA's National Transition Unit as they gear up. The N2U People and Workforce Workstream have been working to determine which functions and positions are likely to transition to the new water services entity, in our case, Entity A. There will be more certainty in mid-March around that certainty will allow the NTU to begin the consultation process with affected staff. And of course, as matters stand, that is water care staff and what we understand as what we call Healthy Waters, our stormwater management team. The second part of the reform agenda is in relation to the future for local government work. The Auckland Council submission on that, again, is part of the governing body agenda for today, and the Council will lodge its submission in relation to the draft report by the 28th of February. And then thirdly, in relation to the resource management system reform, the Spatial Planning Bill, Natural and Built Environment Bill are now before the Environment Select Committee. Council lodged 2 submissions and presented to the Select Committee in the middle of February, arguing that the proposed independent regional planning committees will create fragmented governance and coordination problems, and that climate change is not sufficiently front and centre of the reforms. We have offered to work with the Select Committee and officials to support the design of bespoke arrangements for Auckland. The Climate Adaptation Act is expected in the next few months. The legislation will introduce the legal framework for managed retreat. Without a clear understanding of the scope of the Act, it's difficult to anticipate how the 3 acts will work together and how the reforms will reduce emissions and effectively address the impacts of climate change. Transition to the new system will happen in stages and is expected to take several years. The National Planning Framework is expected to be released for public consultation in October to December 2023. And obviously that conversation is very much front of mind for many in New Zealand. I do want to comment on the work we've been doing in support of our response to the flood and the cyclone challenges. The experience of the 27th of January and the following cyclone will bring a lot of focus and attention to the reform agenda generally. The significant and devastating events will require a rethink or an acceleration of programs of work on land use and planning, managed retreat adaptation approaches and regulatory settings. The February Planning, Environment and Parks Committee has commissioned work to be done in these areas to identify the improvements required across policy, settings and the Unitary Plan and Plan Change 78. Understanding how we build back better by building in resilience and adaptation in everything we do will be important. We will also work with central government and other agencies as we move from response to recovery. The Civil Defence and Emergency Management Committee meet today to appoint an interim recovery manager, and recovery will be an important focus of our agenda for some time to come. While we can see for ourselves the devastating impacts on people, communities, land and infrastructure around Tamaki Makaurau, there are also many stories of strength. I want to thank the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, all of our elected members, community and business leaders, iwi and Matawaka, FENS, police, the Defence Force and Red Cross, a range of NGOs, NEMA, Met Service and central government partners for the collective effort required to respond to the storm and cyclone. There are many hands shaping this response and many we will need to acknowledge in time, and many are needed to shape and deliver on our recovery. As I visited the CDCs and shelters or talked with our people on the ground, I'm incredibly proud of our people and the work that they've done in support of Aucklanders. Of course, given the extent of the impact of the flood and the cyclone, our response will never feel like enough. But I can assure you that our people have been incredibly committed. Over 2,000 staff have been volunteering and working across a range of support activities. A couple of examples from the catering team. From midnight on the 27th of January, the team was delivering the first meals to evacuated people at the Kelston hub by 2 a.m. Since then, they've delivered over 28,000 meals to shelters and CDCs and the Emergency Management Centre. Tava and the distribution team have been supporting logistics essential supplies like food, toiletries, PPE, water, pet food to CDCs, and after the cyclone, moved to working with the Defence Force on aerial drops to isolated communities out west, delivering 200 packs per day to each of the 9 isolated areas, as well as generators, extension cords, 400 litres of water and 91 petrol and diesel every day. At the peak of our response, Ian McCormick and a team of 160 building inspectors delivered the rapid building assessments. As of Tuesday this week, we've carried out nearly 5,500 assessments for the Auckland storm event and another 1,360 for the impacts of Cyclone Gabrielle on affected Auckland properties. We're now also following up with welfare visits to stickered sites with staff alongside the Red Cross. The waste management team and the council waste contractors provided hundreds of skip bins across Auckland with support of the Defence Force and many councillors, including the Mayor. We moved household items from the curbside into skip bins before the cyclone hit. Thousands of tonnes of damaged household items and waste have been disposed of through the Auckland Council waste transfer stations and 14 other public and private stations supporting the safe removal of items. Ross Roberts, our geotech expert, and other trusted specialists in that field are working in the most impacted zones and sharing their knowledge with communities so that they have the context for what was happening. Our Community Facilities and Parks team have managed 3,500 tree-related requests. That's over a quarter of what we receive in a year. Welfare calls are an essential part of supporting our people alongside on-the-ground activities, and we've deployed a team of approximately 40 council staff and partner agencies into AEM for welfare calls that we've set up, and information hubs in some of our libraries to support local communities. On average, we had over 160 people every day in the Emergency Coordination Centre. Many of those were council staff, but many of them were not. People you will recognise well: Phil Wilson, Paul Amaral, the now famous Rachel Kelleher, Mace Ward, Fleur Aldridge, Andrew Clark, Adam Maggs, Nick Turoa. Many, many more have been our bench strength as the core ATM team alongside the Public Information Management Desk and the services that we provide. As the focus moves to our regional neighbours, of course, we have to support MBIE's mobilisation to support other councils. We're sending building inspectors to Kaipara, to Waikato, and we're on standby to provide building inspectors to the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, the Gisborne district. It's obviously been the focus of our attention for the last month, but we're also focused on progressing everything else we've got to do, including the budget. And so it's been a busy time, but I just want to acknowledge the efforts of our council staff and thank councillors and elected members for their support in our endeavours. I do want to invite Gary Blick, the Chief Economist, to share a few thoughts on the broader economic impacts of the weather events before we move on to Peter. So Gary, I'm hoping you're online.
Thank you, Jim. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou and good morning, everyone. I'd just like to offer 3 points about the nature of the impacts of the severe weather events, if I can, from an economic perspective. Firstly, perhaps it's useful to distinguish between the direct impacts and the indirect. The direct impacts being those that affect the stock or damage the stock of human capital, such as loss of life, as well as physical capital owned by Auckland households, businesses and the public sector. And of course, that damage covers people's homes, land, household contents and vehicles, as well as damage to business inventories and equipment and crops, as well as the infrastructure networks. And of course, the indirect impacts, on the other hand, are the disruptions to the flow of economic activity caused by the damage to those assets, such as business closures, disruptions to the movement of people and supply chains, and to the visitor economy. The second point I'd like to offer is that the potential for a surge in the flow of economic activity in the wake of these weather events comes with an opportunity cost. Of course, some types of activity will increase in the aftermath relating to the cleanup, remediation and replacement of these damaged assets. But any post-event lift in GDP may just reflect activity to remediate the damaged asset base, in effect just building back to where we were. And of course, the repair of infrastructure and housing will place pressure on a construction industry that's already facing capacity constraints. So this raises the prospect of repair work being drawn out and limited resources such as labour and materials being diverted from alternate uses. And so that's the opportunity cost that the other planned infrastructure projects that might have been next in the queue, some of those will be delayed. And together this increase in demand will add to inflationary pressures. So the Reserve Bank has offered a view yesterday when it offered its official cash rate announcement that inflation is potentially going to be higher for longer and possibly a longer period of CPI being above 7%, noting that it's currently at 7.2%. And some of that pressure will of course come through the construction sector as well as on specific goods that will be in shorter supply, including fruit and vegetables, cars and appliances. The third point I'd like to offer is about the distribution of these impacts, in particular the potential for flood events to exacerbate existing socioeconomic inequalities. Natural hazard risk, including flood risk, is to some extent already priced into land, and locations with lower land values are often more affordable for lower income households. In particular, households on floodplains are not only more exposed to flood risk if they've got an opportunity to locate there because of the lower land price, but also perhaps may have fewer resources to cope with flood events and impacts. So we're undertaking some analysis to try and understand the socioeconomic characteristics of those local neighbourhoods where damage occurred, and that involves us, council staff working with government agencies to share data and form a better picture of the economic resilience of some of those households, in particular their incomes, home ownership status, insurance status, and the extent to which they're already reliant on government services. And that information may be something we can bring to you to inform your understanding of the impacts as well as to inform the recovery phase. So thank you for the opportunity to offer those comments.
Thank you very much. Very well said, but rather bleak.
Thank you, Gary. If I could impose on your holiday a bit longer and ask you to stay online for any follow-up questions, that would be appreciated.
Certainly, Peter.
If I could now, Thank you. If I could now brief the councillors on some financial information. So on 8th of February, some information on the potential financial implications in response to the January 27 storm event were included in a memo to elected members, and that was discussed with the governing body at a workshop on the 10th of February as well. The response included the potential need to reprioritise capital investment to address urgent asset renewals and a proposal for a storm response fund. That has since been agreed by the governing body for inclusion in the draft annual budget consultation document and supporting information. As you know, finance staff from across the group are still compiling costs related to that response and recovery activity, as well as some substantial costs relating to repairing and renewing assets damaged by the storm and subsequent cyclone. While too early to assess the full scale of costs, a subsequent memo was provided this week, providing an update on the nature of the financial impacts across the group following that January 27 associated storm events. Staff have also signalled issues that will need to be considered as part of the next 10-year budget in response to the need to make Auckland more resilient to the impacts of extreme weather and to address the funding to remedy medium to longer term impacts on the water and transport infrastructure networks. Council staff are also working with NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, and MSD, who have confirmed some costs, including accommodation and food supplies, may be recovered through them. The process to make claims is being coordinated centrally, and all entities in the group will be able to submit claims for eligible expenses incurred. Our insurance team is compiling information on claimable costs related to both the storm and cyclone, and this will take some time to fully complete. The level of claims, as well as the impact on the self-insurance fund, has not yet been quantified, but it is very likely there will be an adverse financial impact on the self-insurance fund. Staff will continue to gather information across the group to refine the full cost impact of the storm events and expect our next update to provide broad ranges of financial impact for your information. The latest memo to councillors from myself contains some examples of the operational and capital impacts across the group. I'll just mention a few of those now. For Auckland Council, urgent remedial works through stormwater maintenance contractors, cleaning and repair works of facilities. For Auckland Transport, roading, rural sealed and unsealed repairs, damage to traffic lights, culverts, etc. Water care, network reactive renewals such as pump repairs and treatment plants. Tataki Auckland Unlimited, cleaning of facilities and venues, emergency management and support. Eki Panuku, repair and maintenance costs across commercial and residential properties damaged by the storm. Now, as I move off this item, I would like to reinforce that Council does have the short and medium term financial ability and strength to both respond and recover to these events. So the remedies that we have were set out in an initial memo. They are the ones that you see in the consultation document and in previous long-term plans. In this case, they include debt, capital prioritisation, insurance and rates, normal and potentially abnormal government support, including reimbursement and sharing of repair costs. So I do want to make that point because it's a very black hat analysis when I'm talking purely about the impacts. If I go now to financial performance, as noted in the very fulsome footnote in the report on your agenda, we have the NZX disclosure obligations relating to the half-year results. So the January 23 performance report will be provided to the governing body via memo once the final half-year NZX release is released to the NZX and the public on Tuesday, 28th of February 2023. The draft report did go to all members of the Audit and Risk Committee last week and was tabled and worked through this week. So it's close to going. If I could make some key points around economic market activity and some of the key assumptions that underpin our budget to see how they are currently moving. Our annual inflation rate, the CPI, was 7.2% at the end of December. That's updated quarterly. Does have some implications for staff costs, but is largely in line with the previous projections and will have limited impacts on our financial projections for the annual budget. I would refer back to our independent chief economist's view on what the impact of those storm events could be, and we really are uncertain around the impact on that inflation rate at this point. Unemployment, 3.5%. GDP was growth to the end of September was 0.5%. Our consented numbers were 21,301 for the year ended December, 4% higher than the year previously. And as we were all watching with interest yesterday, or perhaps not with interest, but concern, the current OCR has moved to 4.75%. Now, since yesterday afternoon and noticing that 4.75%, it was broadly in line with market expectations and advisors. It does not particularly change our view of the forward path for inflation and interest. So while it might look, as we said in our 8th February memo, that the outlook for inflation and interest might not be as bad as it was looking late last year, the forecasts are still high and remain very uncertain. So that's a quick update on some of the key drivers and assumptions within our financial projections. For the annual budget 23-24, governing body has adopted the consultation document for that annual budget, and public consultation will be open from midday on the 28th of February and will continue for a month. So thank you for listening. I'll now pass you back to the chair.
Thank you for that presentation from both of you. Are there any questions? I've got Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. So one of them about staff wellbeing and one of them about finances. So I'll go staff first with Jim. So, just briefly, I've witnessed firsthand some of the huge work and huge hours that our staff have been putting in, accountants filling sandbags and all that kind of thing. And we appreciate it so much, both as a body and as a city, all the work they're doing. But I just kind of want your assurance that we're taking care of their health and well-being and their physical and mental health with the amount of hours they're pulling and the amount of sad stories they hear at these CDCs and others.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor, and thank you for the acknowledgement of the work that many people are doing, including staffing shelters and civil defence centres overnight under pretty difficult circumstances. Lots of different things that people have been involved in that are very different to their day jobs. And yes, we are doing everything we can. You have my assurance that we're doing everything we can to support our people to make sure they get the opportunity to take a break from some of the work they've been involved in, to make sure that they have access to all of the support services and are reminded to take advantage of them, and in some cases encouraged to take advantage of those services. And it is very much a kind of case-by-case basis, right? We have to work with our team of individuals to make sure that they're getting the support they need, but you have my assurance that that's happening.
Thank you, that's wonderful. A question on finances, Peter. So in the rebuild after this storm and cyclone, we're going to have to renew assets, repair them, replace them. One of the things that we used to do a lot in local board, for example, is when playgrounds are getting tired and they need a renewal, we would choose that as the moment to actually upgrade it at the same time. So it's a one dig kind of philosophy. Do we have flexibility in the organisation for, for example, we need to renew a road and we were planning to put a cycleway there anyway. When we're digging up the road, we chuck it all in at once. The one dig philosophy approach. Do we have the flexibility for that?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure that that's a financial question as much as an operational one, which I'd hate to answer. However, if I do turn it to the financial, as we rebuild and respond and recover to these events, much like I saw in the Christchurch recovery period, you want to do as much alignment as you can. It coordination effort for that. However, you need to be mindful of the best spend for that renewal money, which is why we've signalled within the long-term plan the need for that reprioritisation. So I'm afraid I haven't answered it fully, other than that we will need to be mindful of the scale and that we get the best bang for the buck for every dollar we spend.
Yeah, I mean, there's potential cost savings there if we can identify it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. My question is quite a good follow-on from Councillor Henderson's, actually. Councillors around the table will probably be familiar with some of the quite scary financial graphs we've been looking at in the last few years around future consequential OPEX and renewal costs. And this is similar to a question really that I've been asking Auckland Transport in this building back phase. Are we taking opportunities to look at, is this asset in the right place? Is this what we actually need with some of the legacy assets? And really wanting some assurance, I guess, that as we go through that process, we're communicating really clearly with the community about, we've patched this because we need to think about whether this is in the right place. And also how local boards are going to be involved in those processes, because a lot of these assets actually sit with them, particularly in the parks space and community facilities. Thanks.
That's quite a big question, but a really relevant one. Thanks, Councillor. And we are having a conversation this afternoon in a subsequent meeting about the subject of recovery. I think one of the themes of recovery is exactly that question. Where do we need to apply our recovery effort from an investment point of view? Can we afford to repair everything or replace everything? Or if we have to be more selective, how do we make those choices? And then in making those choices, how do we involve the community through local boards in getting the choices right? As we sit here, I don't have a better answer for you than that, other than to acknowledge that I agree that needs to be a very important part of the conversation, because inevitably, we will have to make some choices.
Thank you. Just to quickly follow up on that, I think we do need to think, it is a longer term conversation, but I think in the short to medium term, we need to be thinking about some of the comms. So I would just encourage staff to maybe take that on, acknowledging it will be a longer conversation. So not sure if you have any thoughts in that space, trying to turn it into a question. Sorry, Mayor.
No, it's a good question, and it will be, again, like what we learned from Christchurch. There's a lot of decisions about what you do repair and what you don't. I'm actually meeting this evening with insurance companies and leaders, spokespersons, because they are another player in this, because there will be a certain number of things that they will not insure afterwards. And that is a very big impost on what you decide to repair and not repair. It's a very complex question. It will occupy a front of mind for several months. Regular discussions with the Prime Minister over these, because he's really facing it. Just when we thought we had a hard one, he's got it on steroids. Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. Question for you, Jim. I'm sure I speak for everyone around the table when we thank our staff for what they have done outside their day jobs, for want of a better word, and turned that into night jobs and day jobs all put into one. What is the best way for us to thank them, noting that we only employ one person, which is you? How can we say thank you? Because I'm sure I don't speak alone. I think we're all very grateful.
Deputy Mayor, thanks for the question. I'd like to take the question on notice and come back to you with some thoughts on that. Clearly, the people who have responded to the demands that we've had, or the expectations or the requirements that we've had to respond to Aucklanders, have done it because they care about Aucklanders. And I suspect the first thing they would appreciate is just the acknowledgement that that's not, that that's recognised. But I would like to take your question on notice and come back to you and the council with some thoughts on that.
I think that's a very good question, Deputy Mayor, and it's probably one we all could ask as well. And I imagine that all around the room we're all feeling a bit knackered, to be quite honest. Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I think my question is directed to the Chief Executive more than anything. I, having had a lot of experience through central government, can remember just so many disasters occurring. The stock exchange collapse in '87, the global financial crisis in 2008, but the Asian financial crisis in the middle of the '90s and the Canterbury earthquake, I can give you a list of them. And the one common factor I heard from ministers and Treasury and others after them all was I wish we'd put the brakes on discretionary stuff, because we've closed off a lot of avenues for the recovery by not having stopped some of the spending that could have been. And I've seen things from AT making announcements ever since this council was elected of big sums of money going into what are definitely discretionary. And I'm just going to check, is there something going out to all budget holding departments and of council and to all of the CCO, chief executives and chief financial officers for them to rapidly shove a brake on everything at this point? Not to stop it in terms of what goes on, but I've only ever heard the sort of reluctant comments afterwards, I wish we'd acted sooner on putting on the brakes. I've never heard any time ever, well, we slammed them on too hard and I wish we hadn't been so tough. And I would really like to see that we do that right through the organisation and the CCOs.
Thank you, Councillor. If I respond to it as a question, there's been no explicit instruction to do anything different at this stage, although I would note that the council and every CCO is currently under pretty significant pressure to put the brakes on everything anyway in order to meet our budget commitments and get the run rate into the shape that we need it to be to meet the challenges that we've got in front of us for next year. So putting the brakes on harder, I think will require some political discussions around where we want the impact of those things to be felt. And I expect that we're going to have to bring those things to the table pretty soon to be able to make the right judgments.
Just was more concerned as not to do with anything of that's gone and we're not going to fund it or anything, but just to say, just hi-ho for this until we are sure of where we are. And then we can come back with a better list and a lot more discretion about what we do, rebuild or repair or throw out. Because the longer we don't put the brakes on, the less discretion we will have with regards to what it is we're wanting to achieve out of it.
Very good point, thank you. I'm sure that that's going to be noted. Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you. Jim, thank you for your report and thank you for your leadership. And Desley has asked my question, so I just have one for Peter. It's actually related to the annual plan, but comes on the back of your discussion around interest rates. So in the supporting documentation, we've got the projection in the 10-year plan of interest rates, and they go from 4.6 to 4.9. I've met with some people in terms of the consultation, and they have heard that interest rates from councillors could hit 7%, which makes quite a difference. So should we councillors who are going to be going, or everyone actually who's going to go out and consult, have a refresh of a stab at those projections if they're going to be going from 4.6 up to 7%, because people are making a decision around their selling of the airport shares or whatever it may be based on that advice coming from councillors. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Without having that detail in front of me, I suspect the difference is that we have 80% of our debt hedged and it only rolls off over time. $1 billion a year is what we tend to renew. So the impacts of those high interest rates come through over time, and then they are then matched with the expectations on what we're seeing out in the market and what OCR is driving. When we look at the OCR impact from yesterday, and I do have to say that we've had, just a tiny amount of hours to look at it. It doesn't appear to change our out-year projections for that weighted average of the cost of debt for us. So we are okay, but we are nervous.
Thank you. That was my interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We are fairly heavily hedged, which is an important issue. Councillor Sayers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to acknowledge the update from Mr. Stabak around the immediate impacts from 27th of January. So thank you for that, and Peter's elaboration on the reprioritisations, and particularly Peter, your words around our ability to be able to respond to that. So thank you for that. The question just goes to the recommendations, particularly A2. Just realising that today's meeting's ahead of that release next week to the NZX. So Peter, are you in a position to comment to us as a committee around the statement of revenue and expenditure, and specifically around the employee benefits expense line, realising this is a historical report, and if that was for the group, if we were above or below budget there for the group, and if we were above or below for the Auckland Council parent, and if we were, are you able to provide any reasonings to us today?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Sayers. The footnote on the report really does talk to my inability to go into any detail at this time. However, that information will be fully available when we release the December results, and we can follow it up. As it's a key line, the differences and variances in there are clearly explained. But I am quite keen for myself and councillors as Dean Directors to avoid fines and prison terms at this time.
Okay, I'll wait for it, Peter. Probably just to follow on, just to you as the mover and the Deputy Mayor as the seconder, and in light of Councillor Morrison's comments around the idea of looking at the discretionary expenditure, Mr. Mayor, is that something that you might want to just consider as part of today's resolution to be added? I'll just put that to you as a rhetorical question rather than you have to answer now, but it might be an appropriate time to have that included for your thought. So thank you.
Are you awaiting a response for that, or?
Oh yeah, well, no, rather than me having to move an amendment, Your Worship, is this something that you think is appropriate for today to add the hold to the putting out a directive to the Chief Executive and CFOs about a hold on discretionary spending?
But perhaps if I could respond in the first instance, Mayor Wayne, and through you, Chair. This to me is something that was picked up at the Expenditure Control Committee and something that we can bring back to the Expenditure Control Committee. It would be along the lines of defining discretionary spend, options for managing or controlling discretionary spend, and any implications of stopping or limiting such spend. So I think it more appropriately fits with the discussion with yourself, Councillor Sayers as Deputy Chair, and with Councillor Williamson as Chair to perform that work, particularly given the aspects that I think we've already talked about. The brakes are already fairly well tuned and being pressed at this time.
Yeah, that's a reasonable response. I think the flavour is out there in the air, and I'm sure Mr. Gudsall's picking it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I get to my question, I want to respond to some comments that people have already made. Some of the people that were staffing the evacuation centre that I was based at work in our communities teams, the teams that are on the ground in the communities. So a way that we could thank them is to not cut their jobs. In terms of the other comment that was made regarding discretionary spending, I think we need to keep that going because we're in a natural disaster state of emergency. We're in a
want to be over and above itself. Staff and all the rest of it, and the CEOs expensive. Directly politically accountable may not be aware of the absolute need for us to get our spending under control and to be able to deal with the aftermath of these extreme weather events in a financially rigorous way. So I would seek your permission, Mr. Mayor, to move an addendum to the resolution along those lines.
Is there a seconder for that?
Yeah, could I just ask that we take a short break to consider what we might craft?
I can give a copy of what I had drafted up, and then could be the basis of what you would want to take. I mean, it's not a perfect set of wording, but it's as good as I could get. That gave a direction to everybody to we'll just hold back until we know.
Yeah.
But you can take these words and maybe modify them.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute toilet break in here, and meanwhile, we'll just see what we can do. Way to go. That's a recommendation.